Today's gospel offers a parable giving insight to disciples who are called to witness hope in a dark world. The good news from this gospel, I believe, is that God blesses the trustworthy and faithful, allowing them to have access to God's joy even in challenging times. In Matthew, we have this parable, this third in a series of stories about being prepared for the unpredictable return of the Son of Man, of God. Jesus' story begins with a man leaving on a trip. Before he goes, he calls his servants to place them in charge of his wealth. He gives out talents. For our understanding, 1 talent of silver is equivalent to about $5,000 in today's currency. The 3 servants received different amounts. The servant entrusted with 5 talents immediately and enthusiastically goes about doubling his gift. The servant receiving 2 talents also does the same, but it seems to be taking a little bit longer to do the same. However, the 3rd servant seems to take a while to think about what he's going to do. And finally, he digs a hole and buries his master's money. By the way, this was commonly practiced in ancient times. It's a way of protecting valuables, and it is in accordance with the rabbinic law at the time. So the story goes on, that time passes, and the master returns to settle accounts. The first servant reports his earnings, and he earns praise from his master, who commends him as an excellent and trustworthy person. And as a reward for faithfully managing a small amount, he will be put in charge of something big. And then the master invites him to share in his joy. The second also, having done well, receives the same reward. But the servant who failed to invest his money is reprimanded. The man attempts to defend himself by impugning the character of the master. He said, "You're a tight-fisted man, and I was scared." But the master doesn't let him get away with it. Doesn't let him get away with the attempt to make laziness a virtue. "You are a wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I reap where I haven't sown, do you? And you should have deposited my money so that I could collect not only principal, but interest as well." This servant's talent was taken away and given to the one with the most. Jesus ends this story by saying, "Those who have receive more, and those who do not forfeit what little they do have." It's a hard parable, isn't it? It might be tempting to say that this parable was not in character with our image of Jesus. Jesus as a compassionate, kind-hearted, shepherding person. And in this story, Jesus gives us a picture of God we might not want to recognize. God is a tight-fisted, judgmental capitalist, after all, in this story. Some find this parable disturbing. Disturbing because of what I just described, and also because of its judgment of a man whose only wrong was his foolish understanding of investments. Yes, he was no Warren Buffett, that's for sure. Yes, it is tempting to go down all those little rabbit holes of details, and in the process discounting the intent of Jesus' parable. But let me remind you that the stories of Jesus often disturb the sensibilities of the people he spoke to. These stories shock them, but also help them to see how important their beliefs of God impacted their daily lives. At its core, today's parable gives disciples help in understanding how to face dark and lonely times. Times when God seems absent, when all we seem to have is ourselves and the faith that is entrusted to us. At these times, the parable reminds us that we have an opportunity to choose courageously, to act in faith. The intent of this parable helps us disciples to understand that we have been entrusted with gifts. And yes, using the play on the word talent, these gifts are not just money or wealth. They could be gifts in kingdom currency, in hope, love, perhaps the greatest gift, faith. Our gift might be our understanding that God is involved in our lives. Our gift might also be a talent we have, our ability to sing, to play the organ, to read, to paint, to organize. The list goes on. These gifts, these talents, gives us an opportunity to create a better world. God entrusts us with these gifts. And they are to be used, to be shared, to be multiplied. I hope that you will engage God's gift entrusted to you. The first century disciples did. Those disciples used their gift to become a movement of change for the world under the most oppressive Roman Empire. Those disciples, like you and I, lived in a world that seemed hopeless. Yet they nonetheless courageously held on to a hope to spread the light of God. Those disciples modeled that can-do attitude of those first two servants in Jesus' parable. Despite overwhelming challenges, those Christian disciples found creative ways to spread the hope of God to the world around them. But it was not easy. It's never easy, is it? It's easier to keep our gifts to ourselves, to hide away our gifts, scared to bring them out. This is a story about a man favored by God. This is an old story. I heard this 20 years ago. He was joyful because he was favored by God. God gave him a wonderful gift. And he held that gift in his hand. He admired its beauty. He relished it. He showed it to everyone. And they too admired it. And as he shared this gift, mystically, this gift seemed to respond. It seemed to shine brighter, get bigger. But then the man started to get jealous as people started to touch it, smudging it with fingerprints. So what did he do? He put it in a box, taking it out to admire it and showing it to special people. But eventually, he started to show it less often, jealously guarding it. Ultimately, he just kept it in the box, satisfied that he had it. And frankly, to tell you the truth, he forgot it. It was just his possession. He even stopped looking at it. One day, the story goes, God came back and asked, "Where is that gift I gave you? Let me see it, friend." So the man proudly presents the box to God, opens it up. God looks into it, looks up, disgusted, turns his back on the man and walks away. The surprised man turned to look inside that box, and what did he find? An ugly old toad. What prevents us from being trustworthy with our gifts? It's our fear. It's the bitterness and envy within us. It's our indolent pride, our lazy pride, causing us to believe that our actions are worthless. It's our arrogant holding on to our belief that our hopes and dreams are inconsequential. It's when we experience deep despair, so much so that we believe that nothing we do matters. This is the human condition. And it's found in that third servant's attitude. You see, he was a man who ceased to try. He was a man who hid away his talent, blaming the world and others for the unfairness of life, making a choice to be the victim of circumstance. Fear prevents him from engaging the challenges of life. We can sympathize with him, can't we? For he is us in some ways. For we can be like him, can't we? But Jesus warns us that we should not be like him. For his faithlessness leads to a hell of his own creation. Friends, I invite you to live. To live is to have courage. I invite you to relish the gifts given to you. I ask you not to keep it to yourselves, but to lean into it. I invite you to joyfully pass it on. I invite you amid immense challenges to never give up and to trust that the God who entrusts you with your unique gift does not disappoint. For this same God will strengthen you, giving you joy as your faith deepens God's relationship with you. We are in a challenging time in history. It is a moment that calls us to courage in every part of our lives. It's a time that calls us to reach out in love. It's a time that calls us to reach in to connect with God. It's a time to connect in new and creative ways. It's a time that calls us to use our God-given talents, whatever they may be, to invest in God's vision. Jesus calls us to be trustworthy, and by our faithful action, to help the world find God's joy. Amen.